and every episode I attended brought up a similar issue. May God protect us. It's said that the Ottomans were obsessed with controlling Europe. Consider that the Ottomans didn't go towards Europe, but rather directed their expansions towards the Islamic world. He's going to tell you that instead of conquering new lands and spreading the religion, they left the infidels and went to fight Muslims for power. In short, he's saying they weren't going to make Islamic conquests Muslims. You went to occupy Europe. If my good deeds are considered sins, then tell me how to apologize. You're free for jihad for 6 months, but you can't go worship God for 2 months and come back. The sultans were concerned with jihad and repelling enemies. 36 sultans didn't perform Hajj. You're neither a sultan nor are you managing jihad, nor are you suffering. You perform Hajj every year. Half of the Abbasids didn't perform Hajj. So you can imagine how the Ottomans spared us from a great and terrible evil. May God reward you for this important clarification. The Ottomans protected the Arab world from an occupation that would have been annihilating. Not just nearly so. Islam would disappear with it. Yes, it almost disappeared with it. Even the Arabic language. I mean, Greece, the ancient civilization of the Greeks and Greece, we ruled it. Yes, of course, Greece was Islamic land. Yes, what a positive thing to think. How wonderful. You do and appreciate a blessing until it's taken away. You've been praising the Ottoman Empire for half an hour, my friend. It had no downsides. I'll approach the downsides from a positive angle. Tolerance. Is it an advantage or a disadvantage? The Ottomans went too far with this tolerance. Tolerance and the lack of Arabization were two historical mistakes of the Ottoman Empire. Well, the Ottomans were respectable, so why would they force anyone to learn a language that wasn't theirs? That would be a historical mistake, because the connection and integration would be very strong. A linguistic connection and integration. When a Turk goes to Arab lands, he quickly integrates with the Arabs, but few Arabs, when they come to Turkey, become Turkified and become Turkish. The conquerors didn't force the peoples they conquered to change their language. Speaking Arabic, here, the difference, Sheikh Murad, is between the conquests in parentheses, the Arabic language remains, and the non-Arabic conquests. The places that the Arabs conquered are still Arab. Music, peace be upon you, my brothers, wherever you are. Welcome to a new episode of the 100 Questions in History series. This is the series through which we always answer the pressing questions and address the doubts that have been raised about our great and vast Islamic history. As always, we must welcome the permanent guest of this series, Professor Muhammad Al-Harmi. Welcome, Professor Muhammad. May God bless you, Abu Al-Harith. By the way, one of the sisters wrote to me, when are you going to stop calling me the permanent guest of this series? Hasn't he become one of the family? Wow, welcome to the host of this program, Professor Muhammad Al-Harmi. May God bless you. Yes, sir, we have reached the 8th topic, the Ottoman state. And for those who have joined us now, we have reached the 4th episode, and question 72 is ready. 72 Professor Muhammad, we put our trust in God. Sir, question 72, since we are opening the great arc of the Ottoman Empire and since we are trying to understand the history of this 624-year-old state, what did it bring us in terms of good and bad? What achievements and failures did this Ottoman state bring us? Please, Professor Muhammad, in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, and peace and blessings be upon the messenger of God, his family, his companions, and those who follow him. May God bless you, Abu Al-Harith. Welcome. So we return to the saying that states, like people, always have their merits and their faults. No human being is infallible, and no state is devoid of good or bad. I would like to add a note or a principle at the beginning, which is generally useful, but in our case of the Ottoman state, it is particularly important. It is that the merits and good, or the faults and failures, is this a matter of thought? Or is it a point of view, a perspective? The same thing might be good for one group and bad for another. It's the same thing, from the same perspective, from the same event. Some consider it a good thing, while others I mean, something like sodomy, the act of the people of Lot. It remained a crime and a despicable act throughout human history, except among the people of Lot. Now it's become a human right. It's the same act that becomes a human right. And if you reject this thing now, you have a problem. You have homophobia, and you don't respect diversity, even though it's the same act. Okay, the hijab has always been something respectable. Modesty has always been something respectable, even in Judaism, even in Christianity, even for nuns, I mean priestesses or temple servants. In pagan religions, modesty is something required. Now the hijab is a symbol of backwardness, a symbol of closed-mindedness, and a symbol of the oppression of women. It's the same thing. May God reward you for this important clarification. Yes, this is a virtue, and this is a flaw or a failure. This is an intellectual stance, a religious stance. If I, for example, am going to apply it or apply this to history or contemporary politics, for example, you might find historians who believe that Islam was overly tolerant of minorities and that the minorities who remained within the embrace of Islam throughout all these years, when foreign colonialism and occupation arrived, became entry points for this occupation and colonialism. They wish Muslims had exterminated them. I want to tell you that something like the extermination of minorities will always be condemned, rejected, and abhorred by Muslims, even if it led to this occupation, even if it led to this, because Muslims believe that their religion is perfect and that God's law is above the level of human understanding and human intellect. Of course, we will also find reasons and benefits for this, because many Muslims, many people converted to Islam and became scholars, imams, and mujahideen. But I want to say that, for example, a movement like the extermination of minorities is not found in our Islamic history, even if a minority started something. For example, after the French campaign, people thought of revenge from the Christians in Egypt. Because some Christians sided with the French campaign, the Ottoman Sultan issued a decree not to harm any of the Copts, as they were forced and oppressed. For example, Khedive Abbas I wanted to expel the Christians, but the Sheikh of Al-Azhar, Sheikh al-Dajwi, stood against him. So, let's go to another culture. It's very possible, not impossible, that you will find that the extermination of minorities is something that a historian or politician sees as a necessity, a security necessity, a military necessity, a political necessity. But is it the same action? The same action? Or is it an advantage or a disadvantage? This is an intellectual stance, a religious stance. For example, something even more egregious, dropping the 2 atomic bombs on Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And even now you find Americans who see this as a correct action, a military action that forced Japan to surrender, stopped World War II, and saved millions of American lives. So, yes, we killed 100,000 civilians and innocent people, and we are not warriors, children, and we have deformed fetuses, and we have deformed the environment. All of this is seen by the American as perfectly normal, while others see it as a barbaric act. So let us just be aware that it is the same thing, or it may be an advantage, or it may be a disadvantage, depending on the vision, in the mind and conscience of the historian. Why am I saying this? Because, you know, some things will come to light in the Ottoman state that need to be viewed from this perspective. Yes, and of course, our problem in the Islamic world, and in light of the distortion we talked about regarding the Ottoman state, is that sometimes you find, I mean, a disturbance, or you find a distortion without reason, which is that anything can be considered a flaw. There is no intellectual system from which it originates. Rather, you have a distorting current. So tolerance is seen as a flaw, and extremism is seen as a flaw. The same person says the same thing on the same page, or in the same book, or in the same program. What do you want? Okay, fine. So I would add to this generalization, and it's not just that, but generalization is a catastrophe of catastrophes. Yes? Someone might see it as a good thing because they preserved their state, and if they had gone, there would have been conflicts and coups. I see one person sees another, and another sees something else. No, my friend, the sacred house of God the Kaaba means you go to fight for 6 months, meaning you're free for jihad for 6 months, not free to go worship God for 2 months and come back. May God bless you. I mean, no matter what I did, I wouldn't have given the excellent example you gave. For example, the Ottoman sultans didn't perform Hajj. Okay, but why didn't they perform Hajj? Even though some of them intended to, and it is mentioned in some accounts that Abul Hamid disguised himself and performed Hajj, but forget about the sultans not performing Hajj. Some people will see this as an advantage, because the sultans were concerned with jihad and repelling enemies, so they couldn't leave the country for 6 months amidst the arrest the country needed, whether through repelling external enemies, because the Ottoman state was fighting on many fronts, or in controlling internal unrest. It's not appropriate for the sultan to be absent, and someone else will see this as an advantage. Another person will see this as a flaw, and this indicates a lack of reverence for religious rites. And if you bring him the documents about the holy mosque in Mecca, he will see it as a flaw. The Ottomans' construction and development in Mecca and Medina didn't concern him. Why didn't he perform Hajj? So, you, the person with this suspicion, do you perform Hajj every year? You're not a sultan, nor are you managing jihad, nor are you suffering. You perform Hajj every year, so Hajj is something of such great importance to you. You perform Hajj every year. No, he doesn't. So, you followed the Umayyad state in Andalusia. How many of them performed Hajj? No, it didn't cross his mind. Well, not one of them performed Hajj either, but it didn't cross his mind. Why didn't it cross his mind? Because he has a distorted view of the Ottoman state. He's focused on those states. Well, all those whose location was far from the Holy Lands couldn't perform Hajj. Even Abd al-Rahman I was able to perform Hajj. So now you're boasting about Andalusia as an Arab civilization and blaming the Ottomans. Well, the Umayyad Andalusians didn't perform Hajj either, and neither did the Almoravids, the Almohads. Yusuf ibn Tashin didn't perform Hajj. So, the caliphs of the Maghreb didn't perform Hajj. You should pay attention to this verse, to this path. Someone has taken on the task of distorting it, even though this is a personal act of worship, meaning it's worship for the Sultan himself, not worship for the nation. So, when you say that so-and-so prioritized the nation's interests over his personal interests, that's a very great thing. The first person to prioritize the nation's interests over personal worship is the Sultan, the Caliph. Of course, we'll come to the topic of Hajj and so on in detail, yes, but I mean, it's an important introduction. Professor Muhammad, may God reward you. I can stop here. Okay, now we're talking about the issue of advantages and disadvantages. The most important advantages, or if you want to imagine or know the value of anything, you know what he's telling you. Health is a crown on the heads of the healthy, which only the sick can see, or one doesn't appreciate a blessing until it's taken away. Well, try to imagine history without the Ottoman state. If you imagined history without the Ottoman state and tried, or I mean, if you had the knowledge to draw an alternative path of interactions, then you will be able to understand the value of the Ottoman Empire. Let me tell you something. For example, the Ottoman Empire's first and most important achievement was the conquest of Constantinople and the fall of the Byzantine Empire. This was a very serious and significant event. What was a Byzantine Empire? The Byzantine Empire was the Eastern Roman Empire, the heart of Christianity, the heart of the Orthodox Church. The empire's survival for 800 years is the reason for our current humiliation. Imagine, our current humiliation is due to the 800-year resistance of Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire. My God, yes, because this resistance for 800 to 850 years provided the Western Roman Empire, the Western Romans, with a time and historical opportunity to establish their powerful kingdoms and empires. Now, imagine with me the course of history, disarmament, all of Europe to become Muslim. At most 100 years, all of Europe would be Muslim. Or can you imagine that the Byzantine Empire was the enormous rock that stood in the way of the Islamic expansion into Europe from the east? I mean, the Umayyad state in Damascus. Yes, its center was in Damascus. Yes, look, the Umayyad state knew how to conquer China and knew how to conquer France, but it couldn't conquer Anatolia, which is just a stone's throw away. Yes, very close. How far is it from Damascus to Antioch? From Damascus to the border cities of Tarsus and the border cities, which are the mountains of Eurasia. A short distance. Look, the Umayyad armies went to China and went to France, but they couldn't conquer Anatolia. Or was it an enormous rock that stopped the Islamic expansion? I mean, they had 3 attempts, and another one that lasted 7 years. And then there was the second attempt by Muawiyah, the second Umayyad attempt, and then there was the attempt by Sulayman ibn Abd al-Malik at Marj Debek. He established an advanced operations center, as we mentioned before, and said, I will either die here or conquer Constantinople. Indeed, his time came and he died. Umar ibn Abd al-Aziz was forced to withdraw the Muslim army because disease and hunger had spread among them, and he was unable to conquer Constantinople. Thus, the Muslim mind from an early time was aware of Constantinople and knew its importance from an early time. This is from the time when the Prophet, may God bless him and grant him peace, said, Constantinople and Rome will be conquered. Yes, if you were sitting with the companions at that time and you heard, Constantinople and Rome will be conquered, for example, you would imagine if I told you, you will conquer the White House and the Kremlin, Mr. Murad. Yes, okay, I am ready, okay, I agree. What did the companions say? They said, O messenger of God, which of the 2 cities will be conquered first? He said his city, Heracles, meaning Constantinople, was a surprise at that time. It's like if you asked which 2 cities would conquer first, Washington or Moscow, and I was happy, I'd say Washington. Yes, I'd be surprised, because Washington was much stronger than Moscow. Yes, Constantinople was much stronger than Rome. Rome at that time had weakened. It had been invaded by the barbarians of the north, and the Western Roman Empire had disintegrated. When we talked about Andalusia, we said that even Andalusia was ruled by a people called the Vandals and the Visigoths. Yes. So, Heracles was considered part of Eastern Rome. Yes, an emperor. Yes, the emperor of Byzantium. Yes, and this Heracles is the name that remains a hero to this day. The word Heracles means a great hero because he is the hero who saved Constantinople from the Persian invasion. This is what was mentioned in the verse, the Romans have been defeated in the nearest land, but they, after their defeat, will overcome the Persians within a few years. God's command is before and after. So, Heracles is one of the great emperors in all of history. The Byzantine Empire. What do I want to say? I want to say that this Byzantine state was a formidable state, embodying the essence of European and Christian power. Its 8th century resilience provided the time and opportunity for something like Spain to rise, something like Hungary and Vienna to rise, something like France to rise, something like England to rise. All of this happened because the rock that was the Byzantine state prevented Islamic expansion. Therefore, we're not just talking about the conquest of Constantinople casually. I'm telling you, it's something like America. It's like, you might be saying right now, if you imagined a Muslim state conquering America, the world would change. The whole world would change. So what's the point? No, it's not just that. Muslims were weakening after the strong Umayyad Caliphate, after the strong Abbasid Caliphate. During the periods when the Muslims were weak, the Byzantine Empire was expanding into Islamic lands. So, as soon as we entered the era of Abbasid weakness, the Byzantine Emperor was conquering northern Syria, eliminating the Saghar tribes and invading Zbara and sometimes Aleppo. So, where was a Hamdanid state? As al-Mutanabi lavished praise on Saif al-Dawlar al-Hamdani fighting, He was fighting in the Levant or in East Asia Minor. We mentioned someone named Nicephorus who staged a coup against Queen Irene and then sent a message to Harun al-Rashid saying, "We were ruled by women, so pay the tribute." Harun al-Rashid replied, "What you see is what you hear. So what I want to tell you is that it wasn't just an empire sitting idly by, it was a constant threat, even during times of Muslim weakness. That's why you'll find the Tulunid, Ikhshidid, and Hamdanid dynasties all confronting it. Furthermore, this Byzantine state aided the Crusades. The First Crusade, which occupied Jerusalem, did so with Byzantine assistance. Sometimes, the Byzantines and Crusaders even allied to occupy Muslim lands. The Byzantine state was a global superpower, and its mere existence was a formidable obstacle to Islamic expansion, firstly, and even in protecting Muslim borders, secondly. When a state came and removed the Byzantine Empire, this was a huge change in the global balance of power. The Ottoman state then occupied a strategic position, which was dangerous and frightening for all those around them. Yes, this is very true. For example, if we're talking about a brief history of the relationship between Muslims and the Byzantine Romans, we'll find three decisive battles. A first battle was the Battle of Yarmouk, led by Khalid ibn al-Walid. This battle removed the Byzantine Empire from the Levant and Egypt. Yes, the second battle was the Battle of Manzikert. Yes, this is the battle led by Alp Arslan, when the Seljuks defeated the army led by Emperor Romanos. The Battle of Manzikert was a huge battle, and it caused the Muslims to expand into Anatolia and Asia Minor. Yes, that's their battle. The third battle was the conquest of Constantinople, led by Mehmed the Conqueror, which removed the Byzantine Empire. So, consider this: if an Islamic state were to emerge, as I mentioned, and conquer America, it would change history. This would be a tremendous, immense blessing, because it would lift a huge burden from the Muslims and restore them to their position as a leading global power. In the next question, Professor Muhammad, we will discuss the conquest of Constantinople in more detail. God willing, we will. I'm just giving a brief overview now because I have questions about the conquest, but we'll leave that for another episode. Okay, so the first thing, the first advantage, is the conquest of Constantinople. Imagine if we hadn't conquered Constantinople, all the humiliation we're experiencing now would be compounded. Why compounded humiliation? Because powerful Western kingdoms had emerged, and the Byzantine Empire still existed. You would find yourself being devoured by the Spanish and Andalusians, expelled from Andalusia and North Africa, and the Byzantine Empire would be taking the Caucasus and Turkey from you, and so on, Asia Minor, and then down to Iraq and the Levant. Otherwise it would have been double humiliation. I mean, all the humiliation we are in now is due to the superiority of the Western Romans. Yes, which is Spain, Portugal, England, France, the Netherlands, and then the Western kingdoms. These Western countries are the ones that created America. Okay. So you can imagine how the Ottomans spared us a great and terrible evil. Okay, that's number one. Quickly, Professor Muhammad, when we conquered Constantinople, yes, what did we have then? I mean, there were Islamic states in the Islamic world. We had Andalusia at that time. Andalusia was Granada, I mean the coastal strip. Andalusia fell 12 years after the death of Muhammad al-Fatih. It fell during the reign of his son, Yazid Roman II. That was at that time, and later, I mean the Islamic states that existed at that time. The Mamluks, a strong state, of course, existed in Egypt. The Safavid state, of course, a strong state existed in Iran. The Mughal Empire existed in India. These were the strong states that existed at that time. In Morocco, and later in North Africa, you had the Sardis and the Hafsids. They also existed. In the Islamic East, there were states, but they were weaker than these. But the major states were like this. So, the conquest of Constantinople was one of the most important advantages of the state, one of the most important advantages and achievements of the Ottoman state. All these regions were Islamic, and many people converted to Islam. These are regions that neither the Umayyads, nor the Abbasids, nor the Seljuks reached. Didn't we say there was a rock called the Byzantine Empire standing there? A solid rock, meaning it was standing still. So, those who entered these places with Islam, this is to the credit of the Ottomans. Yes, praise be to God, it's true. The expansion that Muslims were able to achieve in Europe came from two directions. Expansion from the south when the Aghlabids ruled Tunisia and conquered the Atlas Mountains, expanding into southern Italy, and expansion from the west, Andalusia and southern France, but from the east, the Byzantine Empire was a massive, standing rock that Muslims couldn't overcome. So, when the Ottomans overcame it, they conquered these lands and spread Islam there. Everything in Eastern Europe, from Muslims and Islamic monuments to Islamic culture, is still considered by the Ottomans to be a nation. Of course, this is also a great advantage. I mean Greece, the ancient civilization of the Greeks, and the Greeks, which we ruled for a long time, was Islamic land. Yes, beautiful, yes, yes. So, the Islamic expansion reached
طيب هذه مزية يعني تانية. طيب خد عندك هو في برضه مزايا مترتبة على بعض. احنا لو
the inner. This is the point of stopping, and then it reached lands in eastern Italy, or also, of course, this is an advantage. I mean, another thing, there are also advantages that follow from each other. If we say that the conquest of Constantinople was a great thing that paved the way for the conquest of Eastern Europe, then pay attention also to the fact that it was the conquest of the very east of Europe, and the fact that the Ottomans were fighting in Eastern Europe and in its center, and their fleet was fighting in the Western Mediterranean and in its center. This led to the third advantage, which is the protection of the Eastern Arab Islamic lands, the people living in the Levant, the people living in Iraq, the people living in Egypt, the people living in the Arabian Peninsula. The Arabs were sitting in complete safety under the Ottoman swords, fighting far from them. Nations, I mean, before the Ottomans existed, and when the Mamluk state weakened, the people of Venice and Genoa, these were Italian republics, centers of power at that time because trade. These were the world's trading cities, Genoa and Venice. These cities or states had strong naval fleets. These fleets would raid the Egyptian coasts and sometimes steal the Nile's water. Anyone who reads the memoirs of that time, during the Mamluk era, will know that the Mamluks couldn't stop them. Moreover, the Spanish and Portuguese had an ambitious plan after discovering the Cape of Good Hope route, which circumnavigates the African continent. They had an ambitious plan, in cooperation with the Christian king of Abyssinia, to enter through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and raid Mecca and Medina, destroying the Kaaba and desecrating the Prophet's grave, peace be upon him. The Mamluks couldn't stop them at that time. Indeed, there were raids on Yambu and Jeddah, Spanish raids and raids, Portuguese, or who stopped and repelled these Ottoman fleets. The Ottoman fleet, meaning the Ottoman state, was fighting in a wide circle from Russia in the north to Central Europe, west of the Mediterranean Sea at the Gulf of Aden and the Arabian Gulf, to India. The Ottoman fleet met the Portuguese fleet in a battle near India. These battles kept the Arab lands safe. Oh, how positive, how beautiful, dangerous. And so, I also like to repeat, someone like al-Jabarti, when he saw that the French campaign succeeded in entering Cairo, was surprised, because Cairo, Egypt, since the Muslims conquered it, no one had occupied its capital since our master Amr ibn al-Ars. No one knew how to occupy the capital of Egypt. The last of the Crusaders occupied Mansoura. They occupied Damietta and we expelled them. But no one entered Egypt and ruled. So Al-Jabarti, while he was chronicling, says to you, these are the years of tribulations and successive trials, and days of the reversal of the matter. Something strange. Why did it become something strange with the Ottoman swords? Because the Ottomans were fighting far away. They were fighting on the shores of Algeria and near Morocco, and they were fighting in the middle of Europe and killing in the Gulf. So that Egypt, even the protected one, is called a nation. So this security that the Arab lands lived in was in the balance of the Ottomans. But take note, this security is also a different security. Why? Because the beginning of the Western colonial wave that started in the 15th century, this wave was led by the Spanish and Portuguese. The Spanish and Portuguese weren't like the English and French later on. The Spanish and Portuguese were genocidal, not about seizing a place to enslave people and establish a system. I mean, it's true that the English and French occupations were bloody and brutal, and the French were even more brutal than the English, but compared to the Portuguese and Spanish, they were angels of mercy. Imagine, when the Spanish and Portuguese invaded the Americas, they even wiped out the original ancient languages. Now, even now, if you go to Brazil, go to South America, you find people speaking Spanish and Portuguese. It was genocide. So, the Ottomans protected the Arab world from a genocidal occupation that almost wiped out Islam, almost wiped out the Arabic language. My God! Only the Ottomans stood against this enormous wave. Then look at how the colonizer entered, not just with Isaac, and wanted to change your language. You want to speak his language. Yes, what I'm telling you, we have a living example before us. This is just for those asking about the difference between the Islamic conquests and colonialism. Of course, in one of the episodes, yes. So, now, okay, we talked about three important things. Three things of the conquest of Constantinople, and we said the spread of Islam in Eastern Europe, and we said the shift of the conflict to the center, and this resulted in protecting the Arab lands and keeping them Arab, and stopping the Shiite expansion at the height of the Safavid state. Oh God, okay, and this is a huge matter. It is also important, by God. Of course, now you have many people, I want to say they have an obsession and exaggeration about the issue of the Shiite expansion. Yes, unfortunately, most of this obsession is not a real religious obsession, but a political obsession, unfortunately. But at least, that's why you find these people who are very keen on the Shiite expansion. For example, they don't remember this Ottoman achievement, the Safavid state. This is a real country that deserves its own episode, but of course, a whole series is too short for this. Just imagine, the region of Iran and Persia, which has been sunny throughout its history, was the only country that managed to forcibly convert it to Shiism, and not just any Shia, but the 12 Shia, who embrace the practice of cursing and reviling the companions of the Prophet, Abu Bakr, Umar, and the mother of the believers. May God protect us. The Safavid state's power rivaled that of the Ottoman Empire. The Safavid state almost penetrated the Ottoman Empire. Look, it actually managed to rule Iran and convert this entire Sunni population, which has always been a source of scholars, to the Shia Rafidi sect. My God, it's a difficult thing to do. They've achieved something extraordinary. And, by the way, it was a brutal, violent, continuous, and powerful campaign. If it weren't for three sultans, take Selim I, then Suleiman, and then Murad Roman III, they would have been different. Some of them
في إيقاف التمدد
had a
الصليبي
decisive battle in
سواء في
stopping
شرق
the
آسيا الصغرى أو في العراق.
Safavid expansion, whether in East Asia Minor or in
الحدود
Iraq.
التي لا
The
تستطيع
borders that the
تجاوزها
Safavid
الدولة
state couldn't
الصليبية
cross
هي الحدود التي رسمتها
were the
الممالك
borders
العثمانية.
drawn by the battles with the Ottomans. Yes, because I heard they had started and entered
هم
Iraq
دخلوا
and
واحتلوها
people were
فعلا.
starting to be
الدولة
convinced and
السلطان
change.
سليمان
They entered and occupied
وأيامهم
it, but then
فتحوا مع
Sultan
دولة
Suleiman
صفوية
came,
تبريز
and before him,
نصر هائل
Selim,
يعني،
of
وكانت
course,
أحد
stormed the
الزلازل التي
Safavid.
أعطت
Tremendous
الصفوية
victory,
وساهمت
and it was one of the
في
earthquakes
توزيعها
that
في
struck
ذلك
the
الفترة من الزمن يعني. وحتى تعظيم قبر أبي حنيفة إنما فعله السلطان سليمان، لأنه طبعا الإمام أبو حنيفة هو إمام المذهب الحنفي الذي هو كان سائدا في الدولة
Safavid
الأموية.
state and contributed to its retreat and deterrence for a period of time. Even the veneration of Abu Hanifa's tomb was done by Sultan Suleiman because, of course, Imam Abu Hanifa is the Imam of the Hanafi school of thought, which was prevalent in the Ottoman state. Yes, so now we are talking about four advantages, each of which changed history. I'm talking to you about the most important advantages, each of which changed history. And when you imagine, for example, when you find the Ottoman state fighting on four fronts, well, which country today can afford to fight on four fronts? Russian expansion only stopped with the Ottoman swords. Russian expansion. You know, for example, something many people don't know is that the Ottomans, during the reign of Selim Roman II, son of Suleiman the Magnificent, raided Moscow, entered it, and burned it. This was during the reign of one of the most ruthless and dangerous Russian emperors, Ivan the Terrible, Ivan Roman IV, nicknamed Ivan the Terrible. You know, there was no Ottoman power at that time. This Ivan the Terrible had already eliminated the remaining Muslims, who were the remnants of the Tartars, and he had wiped them out 150 years before they later came under Russian rule. So, when you see a country fighting in the north, Russia fighting in the south near India, the Gulf of Aden, and the Arabian Gulf, fighting in the west in Central Europe, fighting at sea near Algeria, and of course, I'm telling you about the major advantages. There are lesser advantages. For example, the Ottoman state exerted its efforts in helping the Andalusians who were under the Inquisition. They were fleeing, coming in a frightening manner. Okay, fine, I'll be quiet if we're going to talk about it. But for example, you can imagine the longest naval fleet. For example, Professor Mohammed, when you want to talk to someone, for example, when you want to evaluate someone, what are their advantages and disadvantages? So you talk about their advantages, that, well, in terms of politics and military affairs, they are like this, and in terms of religion and civilization, and in terms of culture and administration, and in terms of social aspects, and so on. And you mention and elaborate on what you said. It's all called politics and military affairs, right? Indeed, one of the most important things in it is also the naval fleet. Their development of the naval fleet was frightening to the Europeans. Yes, the naval fleet was a master of the seas, meaning the Ottoman fleet present in the Mediterranean. I know, I want to tell you something. I don't know if we'll get to it or not. In the Battle of 1571, remember the last episode when I told you that there are preserved dates? In 1571, the Ottoman fleet was defeated in a naval battle called Lepanto. Okay, this battle is a battle in the course of military battles. It wasn't really necessary, it was a minor setback, but after that the Ottoman state was able to overcome it and then conquer islands in the Mediterranean Sea just like that. But why is this battle still present in the European consciousness to this day? Because it was the first battle in which Europeans saw that the Ottomans could be defeated. The battle itself wasn't really necessary. It didn't affect the political reality much, but its moral impact was enormous because it was the first time the Ottomans were defeated. This huge fleet that we imagined could never be defeated. Oh yes, it could never be defeated. what? It turns out they were being defeated. People, it's strange. Let's pull ourselves together a little. It's really strange. Yes, I mean, even though conquests continued after that, I want to tell you to see the extent to which the Ottomans instilled fear in the hearts of the enemies of Islam for a long period of time. Okay, of course, and I'm telling you about the most important advantages. I mean, you see now I'm putting forward, for example, an idea. Civilization, nations. We remember we talked before that civilization usually arises after political and military stability. That's the nature of things. That's why countries glorify their warriors more than their artists and engineers, because it's the warriors who secure the work of Golden Age, when the Sheikh of Al-Azhar and the Sheikhs of Al-Azhar were highly respected and no one could touch them. Now, how was this provided? Well, the famous Dayrud Pasha was one of the Egyptian governors and a lover of scholars. He came as governor, and Sheikh Shihab al-Din al-Sabarti stood up to him and said, "Your governorship is not valid because you are still a slave." Of course, the governor thought, "Who are you?" and wanted to strike him, but his soldiers stood up to him. The governor's soldiers, "You're going to this Sheikh of Islam, the Imam," so he had no choice but to send a message to the Sultan. Suleiman the Magnificent told him, "An Egyptian sheikh stood before me and said such and such." So, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent sent the sheikh a letter of thanks along with a document of manumission to rectify his rule. Yes, well, I want to tell you who is this Suleiman the Magnificent. A master of his time, or the great master. Now tell me, even in the most insignificant kingdoms, the ones you can't even see on a map, which sheikh can stand before a prince, king, or president and tell him your decision is invalid? Yes, he disappears, of course. Yes, he disappears. So I want to tell you, look, even though, for example, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani in his book Anbar al-Gamr by Anbar al-Umr or Bina al-Umr, both of which are mentioned, Ibn Hajar lived during the time of Bayezid. Ibn Hajar was a chief justice of Egypt, and at that time there was the Mamluk Sultanate and the Ottoman Empire. He was talking about Bayezid, saying, "So-and-so told me," because there were correspondences between the Mamluks and Bayezid. "So-and-so, the doctor, told me, when he went to Bayezid, and so-and-so, whom the king sent, told me." Apparently, Yazid said they used to honor everyone who had a scholarly name. Whoever had a scholarly name would go there and be honored. In the Ottoman state, this was in the early days. Before the empire expanded, scholars had their place. I'm telling you, these are minor civilizational advantages, for example, under the umbrella. But if we're talking about the advantages that changed history, then, as I told you, the conquest of Constantinople and the dismantling of the Byzantine Empire, the conquest of Eastern Europe, the transfer of military conflict to Central Europe, the Western Mediterranean, and the Southern Arab world, meaning the Gulf of Aden, the Arabian Gulf, and India, and fighting the Russians in the north and hindering their expansion. These are the greatest advantages we can talk about. Okay, they'll tell us, "You've been praising this Ottoman state for half an hour, brother. Doesn't it have any downsides?" And I won't tell you anything. I'll approach the downsides from a positive angle. We raise the blood pressure of the electronic flies that are constantly hovering over us. We really raise their blood pressure. That's how it goes. It's a shame on the doctor. Then, let's keep this brother with us for a bit. For example, one of the advantages that both enemies and friends of the Ottoman state agree on is the tolerance present in the Ottoman state. So, what were the advantages or disadvantages of the first point? I'll tell you, I mean, the jihad. That was at the beginning, the one that caused all this. The Europeans saw it as a degree of fanaticism, a degree of brutality, and a degree of ferocity. And as I told you, the Europeans sometimes used to frighten frighten their children with a Turkish word, mother, and this awe and fear persisted until a later time, even until the decline of the Ottoman state. Sometimes, during a time of weakness, Sultan Abdul Hamid would hear that there was a play that insulted the Prophet, peace be upon him, and he would send a warning to France, which was more powerful than him at the time, and the play would be banned because he didn't want problems. Tolerance. This tolerance of the Ottoman state is something everyone agrees on, Europeans and non-Europeans alike. The Ottoman state was a great empire, and one of its most important advantages was this inherited paradise in which everyone lived. The Ottoman state, for that time, resembled Europe and America. As for our time right now, you find many Arabs and Muslims wanting to escape persecution in their countries and live in Europe, in London, in Canada, in America, because there are countries with laws and countries that protect. Go to the Ottoman Empire. One of the freedoms was that Muslims live alongside Christians and Jews. One of these freedoms was the Ottoman Empire. Where could the persecuted Jews in Spain go, suffering under the tortures of the Inquisition? They went to their Islamic world, to the Islamic East, to North Africa, to the Ottoman Empire. The ships that carried them were Ottoman ships, by the way. Some of them rose through the ranks until they became translators in the palace and personal physicians to the Sultan. The Ottoman Empire's tolerance was a matter on which everyone agreed, even those who wanted to criticize the Ottoman Empire on this issue said it was pragmatic, secular thinking, a way for them to govern these peoples. Those who couldn't make it a point said these are politicians who knew how to play the game and how to govern these vast populations. But even those who were prejudiced against the Ottoman legacy, I remember what Bernard Lewis, a Zionist, American Orientalist and specialist on the Ottoman Empire, mentioned in his research called War and Peace in the book The Legacy of Islam, which was supervised by Schacht and Bavraus, said that the regions from which the Ottomans withdrew, the regions from which they retreated after they had weakened, remained as they were, with their culture and institutions intact. It was as if they were frozen for a period in order to resume his ancient presence. While this is also his statement, there are no Muslims now in Andalusia, in Spain and Portugal. I mean, when he wanted to compare Christians and Muslims, he said that the Ottoman state came and went, and what it came to didn't change much. As for the Christians, after the Ottoman state left them, they had their institutions, they had their churches, they had their administrative arrangements and organizations that enabled them to resume their ancient presence, while the Muslims who fell under Christian persecution were exterminated. There are no Muslims now in Spain or Portugal. Yes, tolerance is a tremendous advantage, and its origin is of course in religion, but in reality, if we want to consider it as a disadvantage, it could be because the Ottomans went too far in this tolerance. I mean, their tolerance was excessive. Yes, my heart was too kind. I mean, your kindness can also ruin everything. I mean, this excess led to the presence of some who were not entirely loyal to the state in sensitive positions, such as being the Sultan's personal physician or his personal translator in the state, or rather, his access to secrets. And of course, there are also non-Muslim wives of sultans or their concubines, and this is common among them. Of course, if you want to talk about tolerance, you say that this is tolerance and something tremendous, something you Westerners have not yet reached. But according to our Islamic standard, no, this is excess. I mean, the words of God, blessed and exalted is he, O you who have believed. Do not take as intimates those other than yourselves, for they will not spare you any harm. They wish that what you have is not for you. Hatred has already appeared from their mouths, and what their breasts conceal is greater. We have made clear to you the signs, if you would understand them. You love them, but they do not love you, and you believe in the entire scripture. And when they meet you, they say, "We believe," but when they are alone, they bite their fingertips at you in rage. Say, "Die in your rage." Indeed, Allah is knowing of that within the breasts. If good befalls you, it pleases them, but if evil befalls you, they rejoice at it, and so on until the end of the verses in Surah Al-Imran. Yes, God has spoken the truth. Therefore, it was from him that it be in the sensitive areas and insensitive positions are held by non-Muslims. By the way, this idea exists all over the world, in all countries and throughout history. For example, you don't hire or appoint someone to intelligence agencies unless you conduct thorough background checks, extensive, rigorous checks that lead you to the certainty that they have no suspicious loyalties or questionable relationships. I mean, the Americans do this, the British do this, Arab countries do. Shari replied with a letter detailing the situation and including calculations, and so on. Umar was impressed by the work of the scribe. He asked who would perform this work for them, and so. A Christian replied. Umar sent word to him to dismiss him, but he said, "O commander of the faithful, he performs work that no one else can do. He is competent and experienced." The still of Omar sent him. The Christian, and peace be upon him, consider him dead. See how you will act. Yes, it is not permissible for someone in sensitive and important positions to have no loyalty to Islam. This is also the origin of the issue of jizr, meaning the idea that a non-Muslim should not fight in Islamic wars. This has two sides. The first side is tolerance, of course, that you do not obligate a non-Muslim to fight for an Islamic cause or for an Islamic goal that he does not believe in. He is defending the land of Islam or even opening land for Islam. This Christian, or the Nazarite, or the Jew, does not believe in this goal at all, so why should he shed his blood? Why should he sacrifice his life? Why should he leave his children? It is a great thing because you do not obligate someone to sacrifice for what he does not believe in. But from the other side, it is also that the entire army should be on a sound level of faith and dressed by Islam, and that there should be no gaps or entry points. Yes, the Ottomans, the Ottoman state, unfortunately, had many such infiltrations. Yes, because of tolerance. Because of this tolerance, without a doubt, there were many Christians and Jews who were loyal to the Ottoman state, no doubt about it, especially those who escaped persecution. They found that, like you see now in our world, some Arabs, for example Muslims, when they went to Europe and felt respected, they truly assimilated and became loyal to their Western countries because those countries respected them, gave them their rights, and provided them with security. Even if they wanted to criticize the president or the prime minister, or express their opinion, no one would bother them. Some people truly believed in the West and embraced it as a creed, but at the same time, some people didn't forget their roots. The same situation was happening at that time. Ottoman tolerance, like I'm telling you, this excessive tolerance also led to look, I'm telling you, tolerance has two sides, one side that encompasses advantages and the other side that encompasses disadvantages and failures. Music, this led to, or if I were to, I'm going to talk about the major mistakes or failures of the Ottoman state, and one of the most important was the failure to Arabize the Ottoman state. This was a historical mistake, a real historical mistake. The Ottoman state didn't Arabize, even though the opportunity existed. I don't want to say the opportunity was easy or readily available. No, it required effort because, in reality, Arabization can only be achieved by settling Arabs in the country. But the Ottoman state could have done that, and it's reported that some sultans tried to do so. Up until the time of Sultan Sam, there were attempts in this direction, and it's even said that Sultan Abdul Hamid tried. Yes, it's said that the call for Arabizing the Ottoman state continued until the time of Sultan Abdul Hamid. If we open Al-Manar magazine, we'll find a number of articles by Rashid Reader during the reign of Sultan Abdul Hamid calling for the necessity of Arabizing the Ottoman state. But Rashid Reader was calling for this, you could say, in the last 5 minutes, or in the final moments. Or was it possible? It was possible, but it was too late, as he says, because Rashid Reader, in his time, saw the effects, the catastrophe resulting from Arab nationalism and Turkish nationalism. Yes, okay, when the Ottoman state did not become Arabized, the danger did not occur. What danger? Well, a number of consequences occurred. One of the most important of these consequences is that the peoples who converted to Islam in Eastern Europe, for example, the peoples who converted to Islam, now, when your language is Albanian, or your language is Kosovar, or Serbian, or when this language is adopted and you convert to Islam, do you have an incentive to learn the Ottoman language? No, you are an ordinary person. Be in the Ottoman administration. For example, let me give an example. We in Egypt, when we were under British occupation, did the general Egyptian population have an incentive to learn English? No, there are no people who have this motivation to learn in order to become employees and deal with the English administration, or who want to learn in Europe. So, only a small segment wants to learn what? The language is good, but where are the feelings of religious people and the general public going? What are they learning? If they were to learn another language, they would learn Arabic because it is the language in which they perform their prayers, recite supplications, and read the Quran. Let me give another example. Now, if you are in modern-day Turkey, who speaks Arabic or who can understand you? Only the scholars, the sheikhs, and the students of Islamic studies in religious schools. They are the only ones who speak Arabic. If you go to Iran, who understands and speaks Arabic? The same thing. If you go to Afghanistan or India, there is an intrinsic motivation among those who learn religion and want to study it to learn Arabic. This is an intrinsic motivation. If the Ottoman Empire had been Arabized, the Turkish peoples would have been Arabized, and the Balkan peoples and the people of Eastern Europe would have been Arabized. They would have been one nation, with the Arabs one fabric. A national division that occurred later would not have happened between them, because the connection and integration would have been very strong. Linguistic connection and integration. Jamal al-Din al-Afarni, in his book Reflections, mentions a Turkish writer who carried the memoirs of Ziyar Pasha, one of the men considered reformers in the Ottoman state, detailed the matter. Ziyar Pasha says that one of the most important problems of the Ottoman state was that it did not become Arabized. He says that when a Turk goes to Arab lands, he quickly regrets it with the Arabs, but few Arabs, when they come to Turkey, become Turkified and become Turkish. There is a small segment of the population that needs to deal with the state. Of course, there were many people in the Levant and Egypt who were fluent in both languages, but who were these elites or segments that deal with the state? He says that if the Ottoman state had become Arabized, it would not have been possible to separate the Balkans from it. The cultural veneer that the Ottomans left in Eastern Europe was quickly easy to remove because it was a Turkish-Ottoman cultural veneer, not an Arab blend. This makes the separation of these countries culturally difficult. Didn't I tell you that Bernard Lewis said when the Ottomans came, everything was as it was? Well, this is also a flaw. We mentioned it among the advantages, but it should be mentioned among the disadvantages. How is it that you ruled these places for 300, 400, and 500 years, and when you left they went back to how they were? This isn't the point, Sheikh Murad. And here's the difference between the conquests in parentheses. I'm referring to the Arab conquests and the non-Arab conquests. The places conquered by the Arabs are still Arab. Glory be to God. The language has spoken. Oh, Professor Muhammad, I was telling you something. Let's not have anyone accuse us of contradicting ourselves, because in one one of the episodes you told us that the conquerors didn't force the conquered peoples to speak Arabic, rather, they spoke it willingly and embraced it willingly. Well, the Ottomans were respectable, so would they force anyone to learn a language that wasn't their own? I mention this as one of their merits, for those who talk about tolerance, and for those who say we forced something, it's proven that we didn't force something. So, this point of tolerance has been proven, we didn't force something. But as a Muslim, when I reevaluate the policies of the Ottoman Islamic State, I say again, what did I want? I didn't want it to be forced, I wanted it to be Arabized. When it becomes Arabized, a natural, spontaneous interaction occurs, causing Turks to speak Arabic. Those Turks who speak Arabic, in turn, become Arabized as well. This leads to a significant fusion between Turks and the people of the Balkans, Albanians, Macedonians, and later Greece. This fusion prevents the existence of cultural barriers that facilitated the eradication of Islamic culture from these lands. For example, even in Morocco, Arabic is still spoken. Even in Andalusia, Spain, despite the brutality of the campaign to eradicate Islam, rootedness of Arab culture was immense, unparalleled. In countries that did not become Arabized. Professor Mohammed, the point is that if they become Arabized, they will understand the common language we share as Muslims, the language of our religion. Consequently, relationships and bonds will be strengthened and consolidated, and even governance will be established. And if governance were to fall, Islam and culture will endure. Yes, but there's also a flaw in the lack of Arabization. You have two languages, so the Ottoman state couldn't absorb the vast cultural heritage contained in the Arabic language. You have a huge heritage in engineering, astronomy, mathematics, botany, pharmacy, and medicine. There's a clear difference between the civilization produced in the Arabic language and the civilization produced in Arabic. This civilization produced in Arabic doesn't necessarily have to have been produced by Arab ethnicities. For example, almost all of the Hadith scholars are Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, Nasai, and Abu Dawud, all of whom have non-Arab origins. But the civilization produced in Arabic is an Islamic civilization. This enormous amount of knowledge the Ottoman state couldn't absorb. So, what happened? You know, when you have two large reservoirs, but the channels between them are narrow. Well, in the Ottoman state, the language of Islamic jurisprudence was Arabic. The scholars and students of Islamic knowledge understood Arabic and studied the Hanafi school of thought in Arabic, but these are the narrow channels. However, if the people were Arabized, you would find immense benefit from the Arab cultural heritage, and later, you would also find immense benefit from the Arabs and Arabic speakers from what Turkish minds or Islamic minds speaking Turkish would produce and create. I mean, you still have a huge number. Look, in the previous episode, you brought the books containing Ottoman documents. Yes, when you brought the books, you were responding to a misconception that arose 100 years after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. You want to tell them the Ottoman documents prove that the Arab countries under Ottoman rule were not oppressed, were not impoverished, and there was no conspiracy against them. Look, 100 years after the fall of the empire, the language barrier is a language barrier because these documents were originally in Arabic. I mean, if the state were Arabized and these documents were in Arabic, yes, this suspicion would not have existed at all, because you would find a huge number who could extract the facts from the Ottoman archives. But now you have two linguistic barriers, not one. I mean, When Mustafa Kemal came and made the language written in Latin script, what did he do? 2 barriers were erected, so the contemporary Turk cannot read his grandfather's letter from 100 years ago in Ottoman Turkish, written in Arabic script. And what about the Arab who learns Ottoman Turkish? There's hardly anyone teaching it now. Those who teach Ottoman Turkish are few, so they end up learning modern Turkish in Latin script. Since their Arabic culture allows them to read Arabic script, they learn Ottoman Turkish, or they translate from English and French. So the material known about the Ottoman language comes from Orientalists. Most of the material in the Arab world about the Ottoman state is translated Orientalist material, or perhaps Arab historians have taken it from them. But where does the material originally come from? Its origin comes from foreign books, not Arabic ones. These barriers that we still suffer from today were one of the reasons for the historical mistake of the Ottoman state's failure to Arabize the Arabic language. This was a very, very serious mistake and contributed to by the standards of logic, administration, and politics, tolerance, and the lack of Arabization. These are 2 historical mistakes of the Ottoman state that cannot be overlooked. Yes, well, I'm talking about the root causes of failures, not the minor ones. Someone might say, well, these also relate to governance. There were many coups and problems, whether in the palace itself, in the army, or on the level of the military. Someone might respond and tell him, any country that experiences problems in the government, in the palace, and with coups, it's a decision, I mean, an insistence to delve into the details, the very smallest details, in order to establish the rule. Yes, indeed, is it a good country in general? Or is it a bad country in general? What do you think? Pray to the Prophet, because that's the point of the question. I want to reach a mind that understands. Understand who's asking this. Let me tell you something. And by God, your observation is important, but let's establish a rule. When someone like me comes along now, 100 years from now, and says that one of the Ottoman Empire's mistakes was its failure to Arabize, it's logical and natural for someone watching me to say, so, you're coming along after 100 years, practicing retrospective wisdom, and saying, I wish it had been Arabized. What's with you sitting on your couch, lecturing the heroic caliphs who did this and that and were on top of their time? This would only be true if what I'm saying was something new, something none of the reformers who lived during the Ottoman era had said. So, if I came along and invented something that hadn't occurred to those who were alive at that time, would I then be practicing intellectual arrogance and retrospective wisdom? But when you find that these calls were present from the beginning to the end, so you know that this was possible, or you know that this was possible, so at that point it's permissible, or maybe, or it's logical to point it out as one of the mistakes, or because there were reformers who actually proposed it as a solution, and not just one or two, but a group of people, or rather, it's one of the mothers of failures as well. And this is one of the failures that is an advantage and a disadvantage, according to the opinion and the observer, and it is the centralized, bureaucratic, centralized, institutionalized Ottoman state. Yes, if someone lives in Turkey and gets residency permits, he will tell you, yes, but man, they slaughtered us. Okay, yes, now, sir, there is a problem, of course. We pointed this out in the 8th episode of this series when we talked about the moment of the collapse of Islamic civilization. I pray to the Prophet again. O God, bless our master. Ottoman state was established on what we can say, in its genetic makeup, a kind of distortion of the Islamic system and the Islamic states, the Umayyad and Abbasid and even the Andalusian, meaning the previous Islamic states, were established on the Islamic system, which is in summary. His philosophy is to reduce the powers of the state and expand and empower society. There is a balance between the power of the state and the power of society. You have a situation that you can say, a mixture of the two. There is also another strong sediment, which is the sediment of scholars. These scholars are sons of society, but by the nature of the Islamic system, they have powers. Their psychological makeup is that they are the heirs of the prophets. Their divine mandate is that they are the ones who enjoin what is right and forbid what is wrong. The means that Islam has made easy for them are the daily prayers, the weekly sermons, the lessons, the interaction, and the issuing of fatwas in everything related to life. So the scholars are deeply embedded in Islamic society, so they have a position, and there are endowments that provide them with economic independence. So there is an essential Islamic system like this, which I have talked about a lot, that makes the scholars a strong class. This is the form of the verse, the Islamic system and its general philosophy. The Ottoman state was founded with a distortion. This distortion has four causes or four tributaries. What is this distortion? This distortion is that the Sultan's authority is the center of power, the axis of everything. Why is there a Turkish tribal cultural influence? Turkish tribes are much more centralized than Arab tribes, so you find the Turkish tribal leader, the central pillar of the tent, commanding a great deal of reverence, veneration, and a strong sense of belonging. You have an inherited Turkish tribal mentality. This is the first point of contention. We are currently examining the factors that led to the Sultan's centrality and made him the axis of the Ottoman state, causing power to grow. This is the first Turkish tribal influence, and the second is the Mongol influence, because, as we said, the Ottoman state was born from the womb of conflicts in which the Mongols held the upper hand. Mongols also had Genghis Khan, the Great Khan, the author of the Yasak, the code of law, whose traditions were respected. This Mongol Khan also held a large center of power, capable of ruling and enacting laws, and his law was considered sacred. There was no authority above the Mongol ruler, no authority above him. He doesn't say that I received revelation from heaven, for example. He is the reference point. Okay. So, there was a Mongol rejectionist in a great state, a large Mongol empire, operating under this system. The third thing is that the Ottoman state inherited the Byzantine Empire, which was also an empire of institutions, where the Caesar and the emperor were the centers of power. So, the Byzantine Empire was a strong center of religious and secular rule. Likewise, the Seljuk rejectionists and the Seljuks also had this aspect, although it was less than these three influences I mentioned. So, when you find a state that arose in a geographical area with Seljuk and Byzantine culture and carried with it a history of the Turkish tribe and the Mongol situation, you find that in the Ottoman state, everything became as if it belonged to the Sultan. I mean, the Sultan's army, the Sultan's minister, the Sultan's government, everything. What is the Sultan? Sultan. So, the Sultan is a central figure like that. What is he like in the minds of Muslims? Not even the rightly guided caliphs. Neither the Umayyad Caliph nor the Abbasid Caliph, all of them had fewer powers, and society did not see them or give them this status that is almost like veneration. This centralized nation was able to easily absorb systems that we can say are not Islamic, meaning it had the ability to monopolize power and to impose its hegemony on institutions and on society, with society which, in the philosophy of the Islamic system, we do not want to control, we actually want to strengthen and empower. Yes, and Ottoman administration was created that was interested in controlling all social conditions. For example, the Ottomans were present in Egypt. Egypt has something huge, a tremendous power called al-Azhar. So al-Azhar, who do I talk to? There is no one who speaks up. Who is the Sheikh of al-Azhar? He says, no, people, this talk is not acceptable. We will make a Sheikh of al-Azhar. The main advantage of scholars is that they do not have a Sheikh, they do not have someone above them. They do not have a patriarch. It is not a priestly institution with ranks. This is the advantage of scholars. That is why it makes scholars always able to resist, able to object. No one can decide what is permissible and what is forbidden, as is the case in the church. As soon as we make a Sheikh of al-Azhar, what will happen? Here the Sheikhim will start to become corrupt. They will start fighting over the position. Before that, the one who was called the Sheikh of Islam was called so because of his knowledge, his ability, his personal talents, the students' interest in him, the people's respect for him, and his courage in standing up for the truth. But when he has a position and this position, for example, is sealed by the Sultan, or later the Sultan appoints him, or later the Sultan dismisses him, here what happens? The sheikhs compete for positions, and cliques begin to form among them. Disputes arise, and this is the most dangerous aspect to the authorities' control over them. Instead of the scholar seeing himself as an equal to the Sultan, independent and autonomous, now he sees himself as subservient to the Sultan. The Sultan has the power to dismiss him and the power to appoint him. Of course, this emerged at the end, the Sultan's. But this is the pattern, the Ottoman pattern. This pattern emerged and began strongly with Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent when he took the step that had been previously taken, which is the codification of Sharia. Yes, we talked about codifying Sharia, making Sharia into law. Well, I repeat, I am certain that Suleiman the Magnificent had good intentions, and he was aided in this by the Sheikh al-Islam, Abu al-Sorb Effendi, a man whose piety and sincerity are beyond reproach. He also had good intentions, but the step they took led to major and impactful problems. And here you find the merit of Imam Malik in his time when Abu Ja'far al-Mansur came to him and said, I want to compel people to follow your book, Al-Muwatter. He replied, do not do that, O Commander of the Faithful. It is a serious matter and every people has its own knowledge. Look, Imam Malik refused to have his book become the official law of the Abbasid state. This was the first refusal to codify Sharia. So, what's the problem with codifying Sharia? Let me approach it from another angle. Now, if you're a man with a sharp mind, a mind that possesses the concentrated and sophisticated understanding I'm talking about, and you hear that a judge in Bursa ruled on a case with a certain ruling, and a judge in Izmir ruled on the same case with a different ruling, you wouldn't agree. You wouldn't agree. This issue would trouble you. No, I'll give you both a law issue the same ruling. That's exactly it. You'll suspect that, for example, one of them is knowledgeable and the other ignorant, or one of them was fanatical and the other calm, or one of them took a bribe and the other didn't. How can it be the same case with the same Sharia and each judge gives a different ruling? The man with a centralized mentality cannot accept this situation. I mean, this situation did not happen. For example, in the Mamluks. The Mamluks were sitting in Cairo and we had 4 judges for 4 schools of thought. I mean, you and I had a fight, so let's go to the Shafi'i judge and the Shafi'i judge will rule. If 2 people had the same fight, let's go to the Hanbali judge and the Hanbali judge will rule and implement this and implement that. The state has no problem. The state has no problem. As long as the litigants went to a judge who ruled between them, we implement what the judge says. But what did the man with a brain and culture, as we explained, do? He said, in order to prevent corruption in the judiciary and to prevent equality in litigation. We will bring this Sharia and make it into a book of articles like this 1, 2, 3, 4, so that judges can learn and implement it. What happened here? Several problematic outcomes have occurred. The first issue is that the judge has been prevented from exercising independent legal reasoning. He now has a legal code, and no matter how similar two cases may seem, there may be differences that are not easily reconciled. For example, if a man comes to the judge arguing with his wife and they want a divorce, the judge, who rules according to the Hanbali school of thought, will consider the circumstances of the woman's family, the man's family, and the children who will be harmed. He might conclude that if he rules according to his Hanbali school, the children will be harmed. Therefore, the judge will exert his own judgment to find an opinion within the Hanbali school that is not widely accepted, or even to rule according to another school of thought. This is because the judge now has the ability to exercise independent legal reasoning. There is no one between him and God. He strives to reach a ruling based on his own judgment. So, the judge, who previously had the ability to exercise independent legal reasoning, meaning he could rule in accordance with the best interests of the people, is now bound by a legal code, even if he believes the best interests lie in deviating from the established opinion. He cannot deviate from the opinion written in the code. This has led to harm. The people were silenced, and the door of independent reasoning was closed to the judge. Consequently, the judge's sense of independent reasoning withered and faded. Even more dangerous than all of that is that the judge is no longer independent. Professor Muhammad, you're saying something dangerous. Do you know what the danger is? It's that it feels like the beginning of a major setback. That's exactly it. I mean, regarding sultans, the authority. With this codification, the authority is above the scholar. The authority creates a book of law and imposes it on the scholar, and he is not allowed to deviate from it. And in order for this to happen properly, this authority will establish schools to train judges. The judge, who used to learn in a context not controlled by the authority, meaning he would leave his home, go to the Quranic school, learn from the sheikh, become a scholar, now the state comes and tells him, we need a judge, by God, in such and such a place. So he goes and comes, and the state has no authority here except administrative authority. Come be a judge in such and such a place and rule according to your school of thought. So instead of the state's relationship with the scholar being that it appoints him to the place administratively, now the state raises a judge. It makes the school for him. It makes the book for him. So, this man, the first one, this judge, is completely independent, and the state is the one who told him to come, and he told it, yes or no. He is free, and if it did not like him after that, it dismissed him or something, he returned to his place. But now the state has raised a judge who is an employee. So, instead of the scholars and the authority being equals, the scholar has become an employee under what? Under authority? Yes, instead of having institutions. Yes, we now have institutions and books. All of this weakened society and intensified the centralization of power and authority over the state. It became possible to bribe a judge, of course, because corruption exists everywhere. But the bottom line is, when you took away the strength of society and concentrated it in the hands of the authorities, the state became a centralized institution. As soon as the centralized institution collapses, there's no one to fill the void. Okay, let me give you a similar example. In the past, people were armed. Everyone had their own weapon. That was normal. There were people and an army to protect the country. Suppose this army was defeated by a foreign invasion, popular resistance would immediately form. Now, in our modern world, in our modern states, people are prohibited from carrying weapons. There's an army that monopolizes violence or force. As soon as this army falls under occupation, what happens? The whole country collapses. There's no one to protect it. You've disarmed the people and the official army that the weapon fell from his hand. This is what happened when the state concentrated power in its hands. The moment the state fell, we couldn't find a state after the Ottoman state. I mean, the Umayyads collapsed. There were Abbasids. The Abbasids collapsed. There were Mamluks. The Mamluks collapsed. There were Ottomans. But the Ottomans collapsed. There's no one. Yes, no, yes. So, centralization, I mean, one of the most important failures of the Ottoman state. Someone will come along and see what Suleiman the Magnificent did as something great and modern, and perhaps they will argue that Sharia is flexible, that Sharia can accommodate modern developments, that Sharia has been codified, and Sharia is now in music. If we talk about three failures, yes, and you are confused about them, are they failures or advantages? I mean, I highlighted both sides, but of course, it is counted among the failures in the end. I mean, we said excessive tolerance, we said the lack of Arabization, and we said this centralization, and the diamond and modernity. Okay, of course, someone will ask us, Professor Muhammad, why didn't you go into more detail and tell us some interesting stories and details? I don't want to miss this great brother. In the next episodes, God willing, we will tell them, God willing. But remember, I told you that in every episode I prepared a doubt for you. Yes, God willing, we will respond to it. But before the doubt, yesterday I was watching something at night, and I came across Sultan Muhammad the Conqueror. I came across the part about his death, and then after his death there are 2 or 3 pages about his achievements. Oh, there's a 60-second clip, but I'm just mentioning some of his achievements so that people know that this man didn't just conquer Constantinople and go to sleep. Yes, that's right. He died at the age of 49 or 53 according to another account. Yes, he was called battles, winning 105 and losing 105. 65. What is he also not our king? Yes, out of 170, he participated in 31 battles himself. In my opinion, he didn't lose them, he failed to achieve his goal. I mean, it's also from the assessments. I mean, you besieged a place and couldn't open it. He couldn't open it with locusts, for example, right? 100%. I just want to make it longer. I don't want anything. And even the statistics themselves say that it was more than 170. But this is because some disagreed on whether this siege should be considered a battle or not. Exactly, there were 21 enemies around him, or it wasn't a game. Yes, administratively and culturally, this is military. He built more than 300 mosques, 192 mosques and schools in Istanbul alone, and he built 57 schools and institutes in various provinces. He built 59 bathhouses for bathing and purification. He built the Fatih Mosque, of course, the well-known Ayub Sultan Mosque, the Topkapi Palace that still exists. He built libraries, markets, hospitals, and aqueducts. He brought water. Istanbul in his time became 3 times the size of Byzantium, which we were. We know it became something very large, administratively. He established a government called the Sublime Porte. A Sublime Porte appointed a minister of state, the commander of the army, and a position called the Defterdar, something like that, which was a minister of finance, similar to the Nishanji position. Yes, the Nishanji position was the Sultan's secretary. There were also administrative developments, like the Qadi al-Aini, judge of the army, the Qadi of the army in Rumelia and Anatolia, and the commander of the Janissary Corps. Many positions were created by the Nimerlor. Yes, he took care of the judiciary, which I mentioned earlier, and its men. He created the position of Sheikh al-Islam. Yes, he created it. He chose competence alone to point people around him. He made education free in the state. Imagine. He established the educational curricular, defined the stages of study, and saw how far he went. He allocated financial grants for students, brought poets and scholars closer, ordered the translation of many Greek sciences and developed the Ottoman navy. He himself was a poet with a collection of poems. Yes, he spoke several languages. His military conduct was exceptionally ethical, and so on. You know, you can read like this. Yes, he died at 49. Right? What is this? Right? God bless them, these great judges. May God bless their lives. Yes, and then a young boy comes along and says to you, my brother, he conquered Constantinople. So what is the doubt I want to raise with you, Professor Mohammed? It is said that the Ottomans were obsessed with controlling Europe more than with the idea of belonging to this nation. In short, he wants to tell you that they were not going out to carry out Islamic conquests, O Muslims. They were going out to occupy Europe. Yes, but that's how they had a complex called Europe, a psychological crisis, an inferiority complex. So they went, excuse me, to get psychological treatment. So they went to conquer Europe, and not out of belonging to this nation. What do you think? Oh, there was a verse of poetry that says, if my good deeds, which I boast about, are sins, then tell me how I can apologize. Come, let's go along with our brother who is raising this doubt. Or, sir, consider that the Ottomans did not go towards Europe, but rather directed their expansions towards the Islamic world. What would you have said? He would tell you he left the infidels instead of conquering new lands and spreading the religion in new lands. He went to fight Muslims for power instead of killing your brothers. Why don't you go, my brother, and conquer Zantar, which has bewildered us, which halted the Islamic advance, and which did this and that? Isn't that what would have happened? Yes, man's satisfaction is an unattainable goal. You don't know. Well, now, when you find people among the Muslims, when they wanted to direct their energy towards jihad against the infidels and spreading Islamic conquests, and they stood firm in that, and they were few. What about Osman, when he started with 400 families, 400 people who stood firm, and they were few against an empire that was 11 centuries old, and they plunged into this sea, and Sultan for example, he turned back and went east. He was conquering in the west, or rather, the state, during his time, was expanding westward and in Europe. By Selim's time, he found the Safavid state behind him, so he was forced to return. Is it a strength or a weakness that he was trying to stop the Safavid threat? And when he found the Mamluks allied with the Safavids, and this is still documented in some records and in the Ottoman archives, he found pleas from the people of Aleppo for him to save them, for the Ottomans to save them from the Mamluks and their oppression, because at the end of any state's reign, and we talked about the Mamluks in an episode, the end of states is always marked by oppression, weakness, and corruption. The nature of states is like the nature of people. All people in their 90s weaken, their institutions weaken, their power weakens. So, states at their end experience increased weakness and corruption. So, someone called upon him to save them, and he found that these lands were already under attack from Portugal, Genoa, and Venice. So, this man, Selim, came to take these Arab regions 200 years after the establishment of the state. The state was established in 1299 and 1300. Sir, it appeared in the Levant in 1514, 1515, 1516, 517, meaning after 215 years. So, this doubt is an argument for those who love the Ottoman state, not an argument for those who hate it. These people added to the Islamic state and spread Islam. A biggest proof of this is that the conquests of this state were celebrated in the Islamic capitals. A Ottoman Sultan, for example, you know about Bayezid Roman II, and perhaps we should go to Bayezid I, the Thunderbolt. Bayezid the Thunderbolt repelled the last of the Crusades that wanted to seize Jerusalem again in a huge and famous battle called the Battle of Newcastle. When he stood before this, the papacy, allied with Hungary, Serbia, and Italy, and with them, this Huge alliance Bayezid crushed it in this battle. This was the last crusade because it was intending to get rid of the Ottomans, then continue until you recapture Jerusalem. The important thing is that the Ottoman expansion westward is a reality, which is considered a positive achievement of the Ottoman state. Simply put, Professor Muhammad, the episode is over, though it's not boring. Talking about the Ottoman state is vast and complex. It's endless. Without a doubt, we've given a very concise summary of its achievements and shortcomings. The whole series is exciting, so anyone who wants to delve deeper should consult the references to learn more I've posted this morning. By some twist of fate about the Bayaglu district, I prayed there on Friday and was surprised to find that it's the area just below Shishli. It's a small area geographically, but it has 211 historical landmarks. Imagine that. So I've detailed them all. It's a small area, and by the way, it's related to the story of Muhammad al-Fatih. Among the places where Christians or Nazarenes were left, meaning where they lived and managed their affairs, of course, the Nazarenes chose the reformer that suits you, my dear brother. Anyway, thank you very much, Professor Muhammad. May God bless you, Abu al-Haris. Yes, as for you, my brothers, wherever you are, don't forget to share this episode with your brothers and friends so that good may be done for everyone. Until we meet in the next episode of the 100 Questions in History series, may you remain in God's care. Until we meet again to watch more programs about Islamic history and to learn about its events, victories, defeats, leaders, scholars, events, secrets, governance, politics, wars, and battles. All you have to do is follow our history channel on YouTube. Our history, from the furthest point in the past.